and welcome to the 5 key skills you gain from reading. My name is Dr. Vicky Brewster, and I'm here to tell you today about the fantastic skills that you gain from reading, whether you know about them or not. This is a recording of a session that was meant to happen a few weeks ago, but unfortunately I got COVID, so had to cancel. So rather than set up a new live workshop, I thought I would just record this as I have now launched Words Have Power, which I'm going to be talking about at the end of the session. And you can all find out about these wonderful skills that you are developing potentially without even knowing about it. So what is the purpose of this session? We have three learning objectives for today. The first is to discover the skills that you are already developing from reading, no matter what you read. And that's very important that you recognize that this isn't just about what you get out of reading Dickens or Shakespeare or Bronte. This is whatever you read. If you're reading romance or horror or pulp crime or Reader's Digest, whatever you're reading, you are gaining benefit from it. And this session is going to detail what those benefits are. Our second objective, we're going to learn how these skills can be transferred to the workplace or other situations. So transferable skills are a big thing when it comes to assessing education at the moment and educational value. So we're going to be looking specifically at the skills that can be cross-purposed away from reading into all of the other places in which you deal with words, which will be almost every area of your life. And our third objective is how can you make these skills even sharper? So the good thing about knowing about something is that then you can start to work on it and start to hone those skills. So it's not just a thing that's happening in the background that you're maybe unaware of, but it's something that you can focus on and that you can develop. I start with a picture of our fearless leader for at least the next 5 or 6 days. This, for those of you outside of the UK may not know, this is the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who is the leader of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party have been in government here for a long time. And they do not like the humanities very much. They don't like the creative industries very much. And especially in the last few years, Mr. Sunak and his party have been on the tail of the arts and humanities in higher education in particular. And this is something that Mr. Sunak said at his Conservative Party conference in 2023. It says Rishi Sunak recently announced a crackdown on rip-off degrees aimed at studies that don't lead graduates to gainful employment. Gainful employment is something that we're going to come on to. Predictably, this seems to be targeting what have historically been lauded as Mickey Mouse degrees, for example, the social sciences and humanities. So Rishi Sunak and his party think that English literature, which is the study in which we do a lot of reading, is a rip-off degree because when you come out of English literature, there's no obvious job for you to go straight into. There unfortunately are very few jobs where you just sit and read a book all day. I wish there were more, but there aren't. And the industries where you do things like that, like publishing, reviewing, I guess, literary journalism, that kind of stuff, they're very limited fields, and getting into them is very competitive. So it's not so easy to say you're doing an English literature degree and then you go straight into an English literature related job. It tends to be that you do an English degree and you go do something else, where your degree is still incredibly helpful to what you're doing, but there's not a set, you go from this to this. There's not a set career path. And what also concerns Mr. Sunak is that people who do humanities degrees, who study English literature, when they then go straight into the workplace, they're not immediately making a lot of money. There are plenty of studies and aspects of journalism that I can lead you to go do your own research on that suggests that people who do humanities degrees actually catch up within kind of 5 to 10 years with the more vocational degrees and STEM degrees. So in the long term, there's not actually that much difference. But Mr. Sunak wants to see results straight away. So that is why he thinks that English literature is a ripoff. But there are many brilliant transferable skills that are developed from reading, which at its simplest is what an English degree is. So in an appropriately BuzzFeedy headline, here are the top 5 skills you develop from reading, perhaps without even realizing it. So skill 1, you boost your imagination. And now a lot of these are probably going to sound like obvious things. But they do have massive knock-on benefits. So when you boost imagination, you're increasing creativity. And this is what happens when we read, because books, articles, short stories, whatever you're reading, the written word is not a static photograph. So it goes into your head and it doesn't stay as one thing. Your brain works with it. So if you are reading a story, for those of you who don't have aphantasia, lucky old you, you probably have pictures in your head, maybe moving pictures. Maybe you have scents in your head or textures or feelings. For me, I'm a very verbal processing person, so I quite often have lots of different voices in my head when I'm reading. The narrator might have different voices. I'm doing a lot of attention to what intonation sounds like in dialogue and that kind of thing. So we see words on the page, but when they go into our brains do clever things with them. Otherwise, they'd be bored. Just reading something is not very interesting. The interesting part comes when our mind gets to play with it a little bit. And that sounds like something that's just kind of nice and fun. So how is that a skill? Well, that is a skill because better creativity means more creative solutions. So the more time you spend taking some words off of a page and playing with them in your brain, the better you get at playing with different scenarios, different situations, following through how to focus on different solutions for different problems. Creative problem solving is a massive transferable skill, and it's something that's very highly valued in a number of industries, particularly at higher kind of executive managerial levels. Creative solutions are a big thing. And if you think about it, some of the biggest problems of our time are explored and reimagined in fiction. So when we're reading stories, the effect that it has on our creativity can mean that we have more creative solutions to, I don't know, how to entertain our toddler for half an hour between bath time and bedtime, how to deal with boxing a cat to go to the vet who really doesn't want to be boxed, the kind of day-to-day things that you need to work out a solution for, and there isn't a set one, so you have to think a bit creatively. But the books that we read are quite often tackling massive problems. So the biggest problems of our time, stuff like, oh, how do we deal with late stage capitalism? Is communism and socialism ever a viable solution? What do we do about climate change? What do we do about the economy? All of these things are dealt with in some way or another in books. So we are reading the various solutions and kind of, as we go, assessing whether they work or not. And we can apply that to our lives in big ways and small ways. And one thing that you'll notice as we go through these skills is that they do build on each other. They're definitely all interlinked. So skill 2 is an increased vocabulary. And this is something that we focus on a lot when we think about literacy in children and young adults. We get very concerned with reading levels. And part of the way that you assess reading levels is by checking what children's vocabulary is. But we tend to think about it less as adults, which is bizarre because as adults, we are required to communicate verbally in so many more different situations than as children. We have to communicate in the workplace, if we're parents to other parents, to children, to to grandparents, which is always fun. Maybe to lawyers, to accountants, all of these different places. If you have to go and talk to the tax office, that's a different kind of situation in which you need to express yourself. So the amazing thing about an increased vocabulary is that you start to learn what words to use in different situations. So the language that you use to talk to your friends is going to be very different than the language that you use to present a great idea that you had to the board of directors, for example, or maybe to pitch your book to a potential publisher. So the more that we read and the more that we engage with language and with words and see how words are used in different situations, the better we become at then applying that knowledge and becoming better communicators ourselves. And this works two ways. It's not just about the words that you have in your brain that you put out into the world. It's about understanding what other people are saying to you. So if you go into those different situations and you maybe think, oh God, I've got a meeting with my accountant and they're going to use loads of tax jargon and I'm not going to understand any of it. The more you read, the more likely you are to have that increased lexicon of words so that you know what these different situations are. And the more likely you are to understand the subtext of what's being said as well as the text. And subtext is something that we're going to get onto in a little bit. The one little caveat that I've put in bullet point 3 there is even if it means you don't know how to pronounce things. I think we've all known that situation. Certainly if you're an avid reader, where you've seen a word written down loads and you've never heard it said out loud. So you just kind of come out with something and then realize maybe months, maybe years later that you've been saying this word wrong for a long time. I had this happen when I was teaching a specific film at Swansea University last year, where I had only seen the title of a book that's now a film written down, and realized that I have been pronouncing, see, I even have to think now about how to say it, Persepolis. I was pronouncing as Persepolis for years. It happens, and I think it is worth that minor embarrassment to have this amazing increased vocabulary. So skill 3 is story critique. Now, this is one of those things that might seem like it's only going to be really useful if you're working in a story-based industry. So if you're writing, publishing, reviewing, dealing with stories on a day-to-day basis, if you're working in video games, if you're working in films, television series, all of those kinds of things. But stories are not just fictional stories. And we're going to come on to that in a moment. So let's start with a couple of exercises. This is initially intended to be an interactive workshop. So feel free to pause, make some notes, just have a little think in your head, however you want to do it. But I would like you to think about the last book that you read, either entirely or in part, that you didn't enjoy, and just jot down a couple of things that you didn't like about it. So I'm going to use my most recent DNF, did not finish, as an example. I won't name and shame the book, but it was a magical realist book that was narrated by a woman who is a newish mother. She had a toddler, and it sounded like she had the most perfect life before she had children, and then she had this child and everything became awful, and she discovered that she was in an incredibly heteronormative patriarchal relationship. Everything was really difficult. She had no sense of identity anymore. And it just made me very cross. So the things I didn't like about it, I'm not keen on books about motherhood. I don't have children, so it's not really a situation that I understand very well. I'm not a massive fan of magical realism. I think if you're going to write a fantasy book, you should just write a fantasy book. And the third thing I didn't like is a lot of the interactions in the relationship reminded me of really horrible relationships that I've had, and it wasn't a very nice experience. It made me very cross. So you hopefully have maybe 2 or 3 things that you've written down as well. Now I want you to think about how would you improve it. So we've done the critique part of story critique. We've identified these are the things that I didn't like, or this was a big thing I didn't like, and these are the reasons I didn't like it. And now we move on to that creative solution making process. So again, we see these all linked together. How would you improve it? So I think if I was writing that story, the way I would improve it is I would talk a little bit more about why this mother had children. If her life was so perfect before and motherhood is so difficult for her, what kind of happened in that in-between period? You know, was it something that she and her husband talked about and they purposely had children and it didn't work out the way that they wanted? Was it something that happened by accident and then they felt like they had to deal with it? You know, what were the conversations around that thing happening? So you hopefully have a similar solution to whatever you didn't like in mind on how to improve it. And can you think of another book that you read that did that thing better? So for me, a really good example would be We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, which I don't think anyone who's read it or seen the film adaptation, which is also amazing, would disagree that that book is about finding motherhood very difficult. But a lot of attention is paid to why they decided to have children and kind of what specifically went wrong and where it went wrong. So it was a lot easier to have empathy with the characters for me. So in this kind of 3-stage process that I've taken you through, you've identified what you don't like. And it's always easier to talk about things that you don't like than things that you do like. It's one of those weird, annoying things of life that it's just easier to complain than not to complain. So we've identified a book that we didn't like. We've identified what in that book we didn't like. So we've got specific with it. We've thought about how to improve it, and we've thought about other things that have happened that would have made that better. So we've got practical examples. We're not just doing a thought process here. We're saying that thing over there did it better. This is something that can be applied to almost any problem that you have. So we come back to the problem solving aspect of things. But it's more than just problem solving. It's using analytical skills to get specific into this is what the issue is. This is where I see a problem in this story. And the reason that I separate out story critique from problem solving is because it's related to narrative, which is a little bit different than the examples that I was giving earlier of trying to box your cat to go to the vet. When we are communicating ideas to people, it is often helpful to relay that in the form of a narrative. So if we come back to the example of pitching a book to a publisher, as well as telling them what the story is, it might be helpful to say how you came up with the idea for it, who you think would like to read it. Comparable text is something that I know a lot of authors find really annoying, trying to find those comps. But this is why it's important, is because we really build our lives as humans around stories. And when we're talking to someone, quite often, what we're saying is important, but the story around it, the context, is also incredibly important. So story critique is about understanding context and problem solving as a kind of meshy thing. Okay, skill 4, spotting patterns. And again, you can start to see how the thread is coming through. So spotting patterns is something that we do so often as book lovers. So I'm going to take you through some examples here. And again, feel free to pause whenever you want if you want to jot down some notes. But if someone asked you, what kind of books do you like? What would you say? So my response to that would probably be, I really like horror and science fiction. I don't really like romance or anything that involves an emotion. No Pixar films. Emotions are cruel and painful. And from there, you might get a little bit more detailed. Because if I just told you I like horror books or I like science fiction books, that's a massive stack of the shelf. Um, so perhaps you might drill that down into what are your favorite tropes? Um, so for me, my favorite tropes, I love haunted houses. I love dystopia. I'm quite into clones at the moment, like evil clones and alien invasions. Really scratch my itch at the moment. Um, if you are into genres like romance, the tropes are going to be super specific. So, for example, enemies to lovers, you're going to have a really clear idea of what the story progression is there. You know, you've got certain plot beats where you start out, you've got two characters, they're enemies, there's a conflicting event, something happens that means that they have to work together. As they work together, a romance develops. There's internal conflict in terms of thinking, oh no, this person's meant to be my enemy, but I'm gaining feelings. And then by the end, you have a full-on romance, happily ever after happening. Um, and you can say similar things about tropes in other books. So haunted houses, for example, you're going to have probably an old creaky house. Someone moves into it. Someone else knows that it's haunted. The people who move into it start to discover strange things. Things go bump in the night. They go through a process of thinking they should leave, but there's a reason why they can't. The haunting comes to a head. Terrible things happen. That's usually the story arc of a haunted narrative. So when we talk about tropes, when we have that really quick response to someone saying, "What kind of books do you like?" and you're like, "Oh, I like haunted house stories." You're only using a couple of words, but in your head, you have a much bigger idea of what the story arc is. And you maybe have emotions related to that as well. You know, you have the emotional turmoil of um, knowing that these characters are going into a horrible situation. And you know that things aren't going to be okay, but they think everything's great. So there are emotional aspects to this tied in as well. But a trope in its basic form is a pattern. It's one that you would recognize. So if I'm reading, oh, now I have to think of one, The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, I can start to see the pattern and I can see where it deviates from the pattern. You don't have a new person moving into the house, you have an existing family in the house where a haunting suddenly starts. So in this pattern spotting, we are learning a skill that means that we start to spot patterns out in the real world. So while you may not look at a news story and say that's typical enemies to lovers, you are nevertheless spotting patterns that exist within politics, within economics, within anything where there is a narrative, which is almost everything. So especially as you start reading news stories, and especially if you're now that we're in a kind of culture where news is a little bit more flexible in terms of fact checking than perhaps it used to be. Spotting patterns is really important. And in fact, pattern spotting is a top skill appreciated by MI5 and the Secret Intelligence Service in their job specifications for analysts. So one of the things that they are really looking for is the ability to spot different patterns, spot tropes, but tropes in real life. And then our final skill, and this is a big one, is critical analysis. Now, critical analysis is one of those skills that you are expected to develop in any higher education course. I work as a peer writing advisor, which means that I see students from all over Swansea University and I help them out with their writing. And critical analysis is one of the skills that people tend to find hardest. But it's one of those weird ones. Because as an English literature student, if you go to a seminar or a lecture or something like that, that is cross-disciplinary, you will hear this constant emphasis on you need to develop your critical analysis. In an English literature classroom, it's never really mentioned because everything we do is critical analysis. So the key question when thinking about this as a transferable skill to the wider world is, do you believe everything you read? And I'm sitting here knowing that I've got a Rishi Sunak quote on my next screen that is coming up on the PowerPoint. But yeah, critical analysis is about not just reading the words that are in front of you, but it's about understanding their context and understanding what is not said as much as what is said. So this means looking at subtext, contextuality, comparing different texts that tell the same story. So for example, would you expect a story about immigration to be covered in the same way by the Daily Mail as it would be by the Guardian? They're telling the same story, but what you get out of them is completely different. And you understand that better if you understand the context of the Daily Mail is very anti-immigration. The Guardian is left-leaning-ish. It used to be. It's becoming more centrist, but I think a lot of people would consider it a left-leaning woolly liberal elitist rag. So understanding which of those stories is the truth, and also that neither of those stories is necessarily all of the truth, is what critical analysis is. Now, we learn about this when we read books because of all of the things that I've already talked about, because we are spotting different patterns, but looking at where they deviate from the patterns, because we are thinking about what we do enjoy and what we don't enjoy and what other books did better, because we are increasing our vocabulary and therefore learning that the same words in slightly different orders or choosing one word over another word can lead to a massive gap of interpretation or a massively different interpretation. All of that is leading up to this critical analysis skill that every single degree that you do at a higher education institute wants you to understand by the time you leave. So although although certain people have been calling English literature a rip-off degree, all of English literature is to do with this one key skill that we want out of anyone who leaves higher education. So a little bit of detail on thinking about or trying to distill what critical analysis is that it helps you understand the context through which you interpret or reinterpret something that you've read, and to understand that you are making an interpretation and that there is not a single solid truth. So an example of this is thinking about George Orwell's, I was going to call this short story, it's a novella, Animal Farm. So if you knew nothing about Animal Farm and someone put it in front of you, you've got quite a short novel, probably in terms of length, about suitable for a 10 to 12-year-old. It's set on a farm, it's got talking animals, and the animals take over the farm from the humans. Hurrah! So you might read that out of context and think, oh, this is a children's story. This is comparable to Watership Down or Charlotte's Web, which both take very grisly, serious subjects, but imagine them for children through the lens of animals. However, if you know that Animal Farm is by George Orwell, and if you understand George Orwell's politics, or the rest of what George Orwell has written, or the political context in which it was written, you would probably have a very different interpretation of Animal Farm. You would probably see it as a political commentary, or as a political criticism, or as satire, or as a thought experiment for communism taken into a specific condensed situation, into a microcosm. So does Animal Farm make more or less sense if you know about Soviet communism? I think it does. So that's a really good example of taking a text not on its own, which I think a lot of people think is what happens with English literature. You know, you read a book and then you read another book and then you read another book and you just have a lovely time reading books. But what we do is store these stories along with the stories that we hear every day about the world that we live in. And we synthesize them together. They work in synergy together. We pick at certain story plots, tropes, different kinds of vocabulary, different contexts, and push them all together in order to learn something different about the world. And that's critical analysis. So, having gone through all of our skills, I'm going to return to those sad puppy dog eyes and come back to this quote about Rishi Sunak and his Conservative Party conference speech, and return to that phrase, a rip-off degree, because, and it makes me twitch a little bit to do it, I'm going to briefly agree with Rishi Sunak. I think that humanities degrees at the moment in the UK are a rip-off. So before I kind of come into my thinking on that, again, pause this if you want to, or just have a little think, have a jot down. What puts you off returning to university or going to university for the first time if you haven't been before? So I've talked to a lot of AS level students, to first year students, and to mature students doing foundation degrees before they come back into higher education. And there are two really big things that tend to put people off. The first one is the tuition fees. And we know that coming into a general election in the UK, tuition fees is a big kind of manifesto point for several of the parties. But the fact is, if you are going to start university doing a BA English Literature degree in Wales, I don't know if this is UK-wide, but this is definitely the figure for Wales. When you start in October, your fees will be £9,250 a year. That is a lot of money. And we're telling our young people, absolutely, you can still go. Don't worry about the money. You can take out a loan and you can worry about it later. And this is where we start to come into why Mr. Sunak is so concerned about how quickly you're earning money after you finish your degree, is thinking about when you're going to pay that loan back to the government. So tuition fees is a massive block. The other thing that puts people off, especially mature students, are entry requirements. There are a lot of people who haven't been to school for 10, 20, 30 years, who are worrying, that they might not have been very academically successful when they studied at school, and therefore won't be considered good enough to go to university. There are also plenty of people who are fine academically, but are worried that after so long out of education, they won't be able to manage going back in either part-time or full-time. One of my students said literally she didn't know if she could think anymore, which is a bizarre thing to say. Yes, you can still think, it's fine. But we do think of education and higher education as being a very prescribed environment where, you know, you turn up to lectures, you turn up to seminars, you turn up to the library, and you need to be there in person doing the thing at regular times that are contrary to when you would be having a job, which you definitely need in order to pay the tuition fees. So those are the big two reasons that people don't go back into higher education or are put off from going into higher education to begin with. So what is the solution to that? Well, my solution, having established that there is a problem, is I propose that you can deliver brilliant teaching flexibly, cheaply, and without gatekeeping. And that's why I'm launching my new venture, Words Have Power. If you follow me, you have probably already seen me babble about this, but I'm going to babble some more. So what is Words Have Power? Words Have Power is a selection of interactive English literature courses to develop critical reading skills, which we've already talked about, super important for whatever you're doing, and introducing literary theory. So literary theory is where we start to think a little bit more deeply about different kinds of books, and we look into the theory that's been built around it in the wider discipline of English literature, and other media studies as well. There's a lot of interdisciplinarity. That's how I describe Words Have Power. If you asked my husband, he would describe this as a book club on steroids. So if you go to book club and you are constantly annoyed that you're the only one who's read the book, this is for you. If you go to your book club and you want to talk about things more in depth while everyone else wants to drink wine and eat cake, this is for you. If you are put off going to book clubs for those reasons, or because you think maybe book clubs are a bit general, or because book clubs involve going to a place and seeing people and being somewhere at a specific time, this course is for you. The courses that we run with Words Have Power are about equivalent to half of an undergraduate or foundation English literature module. So that means it would be roughly a sixth of what you would study in a semester, but at a fraction of the price. Yeah, at a fraction of the price. At its core, Words Have Power is a friendly, approachable learning environment for people who want to think more deeply about books, and that is our real mission statement. So who is it for? People who love reading and want something more than a book club. So everything that I just described in that whole book club section. People who have thought it might be nice to do an English literature degree, but are put off by price or gatekeeping. So if you are one of those potential mature students, or even if you're coming out of studying at A level, further education, and you're thinking about higher education, but you're not sure if it's for you, or you can't afford it, or you don't have the grades to go into it, this is for you. Writers who want to expand their skills by learning about literary theory. I know a lot of people who are watching this probably know me better as a fiction editor, and I do a lot of writing workshops. And in those, I tend to build in little bits of literary theory because I think that they really help writers. If we're looking at theories that people have built up from reading books, that's absolutely going to help you when you are writing books, short stories, poems, whatever you're producing. And finally, lifelong learners who love a bargain. This is where I'm targeting my parents. I was brought up in a household that absolutely believed in learning for learning's sake, and where money was always tight. So my dad would go to anything that he could that was like a cheap way to learn something new. If that's you, we are here for you. What do you get from a Words Have Power course? So we're looking, if you do the whole course, and I have started to break these down so that you can do the individual sessions instead. But for now, I'm going to talk about this as a whole course. So you get a 12-week course covering 6 books, and we highly recommend getting these from Bert's Books. I'm going to get on in a moment to what our first course series is. Bert's Books are doing an amazing discount for us on these if you sign up to the course. So don't buy if you're going to sign up to the course, don't buy the books yet. Wait until you get your confirmation email and we will give you a fantastic discount code. But if you look down in the comments, there is a link so that even if you don't want to do the course, you can get the amazing books that we're studying for it. So we've got the 12-week course, 6 books. As part of that, there will be 6 live seminars with award-nominated English lit teacher, that's me, Vicky Brewster, Dr. Vicky Brewster, keep forgetting that. The novelty has not worn off yet. So these will be 2-hour seminars that we run over Zoom. I will send out some kind of learning material, some thought points beforehand, and we're going to spend those 2 hours discussing the books, doing some practical group work, and really digging into certain aspects of the text and thinking about our different interpretations, working together to work out what our different interpretations are and what they do to help us understand the books and the context in which they were written better. As part of the course, you get 12 pre-recorded lectures with one very special guest lecturer. So these will be 1-hour video recordings, much like this one, where I give you a bunch of information about the topic that we're going to be discussing. So all of these will be related to what we're going to be looking at in that week, in that fortnight's book. And they will cover very specific topics. As I say, for one of these, I have a very exciting special guest lecturer, Dr. Sarah Gamble, who is a vampire specialist. She will be coming to deliver one of our vampire lectures. And it's a lecture I've seen her give before, and it's brilliant. So absolutely do not miss that. As part of the course, you will also have access to the course Discord. So I'm going to be setting up a Discord server. We'll have a channel for each of the texts. And this is where you can kind of have that more social book group feeling, where as you're reading the book, you can kind of check in about how other people are feeling about it and the kind of the more emotional and less analytical reactions to it. And obviously, there will also be learning materials and support for whatever you need. So this is our first course that we're running, Introduction to Contemporary Gothic Literature. I'm playing to my strengths. This is basically what I'm a doctor in. So as part of this course, we're going to be learning what the Gothic is, how we recognize it, and why it's so popular right now. You know, we think of Gothic as being a very Victorian thing, but it's seen a massive resurgence in the last 10, 20 years. And we're going to be thinking about why that is, and what Gothic is. What do we mean when we describe something as Gothic? So as part of this course, we'll be studying 6 amazing Gothic novels published in the last 10 years. So we're looking at very, very contemporary texts. These are all books that you could just pick up from your library. They're all very mainstream books. So we're going to be looking at how that works when we're thinking about things more deeply. And these 6 books you can buy right now from Burt's. As I say, you don't have to sign up to the course. You could just go and see what are 6 great Gothic books that are out at the moment and go buy them from Burt's Books. If you get them from Burt's Books, you will get a special discount. But as I say, these are all books that should be widely available. So however you like to read, if you prefer to go from the library, from secondhand bookshops, if you want to borrow them from people, if you like audio books, if you have a preferred bookshop to go to, all of these will be available in various formats. So in ebook, in paperback, in audiobook, very widely available. So super easy to get a hold of. And they include award-winning authors such as Stuart Turton, Catriona Ward, and Ali Wilkes. So they really are a cracking set of books. Like, come and do the course. But if you're not going to do the course, still read these books. So how do you sign up? Because obviously you want to. The course link for the whole course is below in the comments or the description. I forget how things work on YouTube. So that's the link to do the whole 12-week course. If you only want to do individual weeks, you can find those from that main course. So from the main course, there's links into the specific sessions or the specific books that we're looking at. Unfortunately, the early bird discount has passed. So the price for the course is now £75 for the whole thing. Or if you only want to do individual sessions, they're £13 a session. You can also subscribe on Substack. And again, the link is below to read along with the course and for information on how to access the course's independent learning. So again, if you have accessibility issues where you maybe can't turn up at the same time every other week, or it's difficult for you, you know, you're in a very noisy household, you don't have somewhere quiet where you can sit and do a webinar for 2 hours. All of the course materials after the course is run are going to be made available so you can study at your own speed, at your own pace. So to keep an eye on when and how that's happening, sign up to the Substack. And this is where I would ask for any questions. But I can't because at the moment you're imaginary digital people. So any questions, leave a comment below. You can find me on Twitter at @vproofreader. You can find me on Blue Sky at Vicky Brewster Editor. I'm on Instagram, I think again, Vicky Brewster Editor. Or you can drop me an email on info@vickybrewstereditor.com. Get in touch, ask me questions. I would love to make these courses more accessible. So if there is something that you need that I haven't covered, write and let me know. But hopefully I will see you at a Words Have Power course soon. Thank you. How do we stop? There we go. No. Oh, I can't work out how to not record anymore. That's pause share screen. Stop recording. Okay, bye.